Hi again. We are moving on to level 3 of the fourth skill of Unit 9, which is, again, building on everything we've been talking about. Um, but first, we're going to talk about what we call the zero product property. Okay? And it's a very important one. And this applies if you have two numbers that multiply together, or two things, or two factors, whatever you want to call them. If they equal 0, and hopefully this will make sense, the only way that would happen is if A equals 0 or B equals 0. Because we know 0, so for example, 0, if A is 0, we get 0 times B. Well, certainly that equals 0, because I know 0 times anything is going to be 0, right? And the other case, if B is equal to 0, I can say now A times 0. Does that equal 0? Well, of course. Okay, so hopefully that makes some intuitive sense. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you're multiplying numbers together and the answer is 0, that means one of the numbers has to be 0. Okay? And this works if you have more than two things. So for example, if you had something like A times B times C times D equals 0, you can apply the zero product property here and say that either A is 0, B is 0, C is 0, or D is 0. Okay? And again, if, for example, if D were 0 and A, B, and C were whatever, 5, 10, negative 17, doesn't matter. As long as this last number here is 0, when you multiply them all together, 0 times anything is going to be 0. And that's what the zero product property says. So now how does that help us? Well, so far we've talked about finding zeros of quadratic equations, where it was pretty easy to just kind of do some algebra, add, subtract, take the square root. Well, now we're moving on to some functions where we can't do that. Okay, so for example, if you look at this first problem where you have x squared plus x minus 56, there's no algebra that we can really do right now. If you try adding 56, great, but you can't do anything with the x squared and the x to get x alone. Okay, so that presents a problem. Now, if we can make this function look like this, where we write it as, two factors or two numbers multiplied together, we can go forward using the zero product property. Okay, and so here's how this works. We consider this whole first factor, we consider that A. We consider this whole second factor B. Okay, and so according to the zero product property, if x minus 8 times x plus 2 equals 0, well then x minus 8 has to equal 0, or x plus 2 has to equal 0. Whoop, sorry, didn't mean to write the parentheses. And certainly you can solve those equations. Here you would just add 8 to both sides, so you get positive 8, and then here to get rid of the plus 2, you subtract 2 on both sides, so there you get negative 2. Okay? Similar here, okay? In fact, let me make this let me change this example just to spice it up a little bit. Let's say I had x plus 3, x minus 5 equal to 0. Okay? Well, according to the zero product property, we have 1, 2, the x plus 3 is the second thing, or the second factor, and then x minus 5 is the third thing. We have 3 factors that we can set to 0. So we have x equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. Okay, and if you notice, this one is already solved. There's nothing to do to get x by itself since it's already alone. Here, however, you're going to subtract 3 on both sides. So you get x equals -3. And then over here, you get x equals 5. Okay, so that's kind of how the zero product property works. These are really easy to solve if they're already, and hopefully you're already a step ahead of me, if they're already factored. That's what we spent all this time factoring, okay? If you guys are good with the factoring, this will be easy. If factoring was a little bit tough and you still need to practice more, well, this will be another opportunity for you to keep working on it, but that's how we're going to solve these. Okay, so now how does this work? Let's apply everything we've done to do problem number 1. So for number 1, we're finding the zeros. And again, that means you replace y with 0. And since I have this extra middle term, okay, I can't just add 56. Okay, I'm going to factor it like we did in the previous level or previous skill. Okay, so I'll review that real quick. The goal here is to, you look at the last number. You try to find numbers that multiply to -56 and add up to the middle coefficient. It's not there, but it's a 1. We know it's a 1 if there's no number in front of a variable. So if you start thinking about all the possibilities for -56, okay, you got 1 and 56, 2 and 28, 7 and 8, oh, there it is, 7 and -8, or -8 and 7, let's see, which ones are going to be? I know 7 times 8 is 56. If I make the 7 negative, that gives me -56 when you multiply, and it gives you +1 when you add. And so then I know my factors are going to be x minus 7 and then x plus 8. And now, using the zero product property, or ZPP, you can take each factor, x minus 7, you set it equal to 0. You take x plus 8, you set that equal to 0, and you solve both equations. So here you add 7, here you subtract 8, and those are the two answers. Okay? Pretty straightforward once you can factor. If you can factor, this will be pretty easy. Okay? Maybe let's go to page 98, and then we'll do one more. Let's go with lucky number, well, 3 is my favorite number, so let's go with number 3. Okay, so again, we're finding the zeros. This is pretty much the same thing we did. So we're going to take 0, plug it into y. We're going to try to factor. Everything is positive here. That's good news. That means I don't have to worry about negatives at all. So I'm just plain old trying to find two numbers that multiply to 18 and add up to 11. So if you think about it, that's going to be 9 and 2. Okay, and then again, zero product property tells us that x plus 9 has to equal 0, and x plus 2 has to equal 0. So you subtract 9 on both sides, you get -9 for the first answer, and then you subtract 2, you get -2 for the second answer. All right, and so that's essentially solving, finding zeros when we don't have binomials, but we have quadratic trinomials now. Everything with 3 terms, we're going to try to factor for now. There's more methods, but this is the easiest way, so we're going to focus on that first. And in the next section, we'll take it one step further, and now we're going to review what happens when there's a 1, something besides a 1 in front of the x squared. So you can start peeking ahead. You'll see coefficients that are bigger than 1, and that's what we'll do next. All right, so Take it easy. See you next time.